On April 3rd, 1930, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences convened to host the second Academy Awards. Numerous changes had been made from the previous year. There was now only one Best Movie category, being called the Academy Award for Outstanding Picture. The eligibility period was a 12-month time frame lasting from August of 1928 to July of 1929, and talking pictures were now allowed on the award circuit. Yeah, it turns out that whole stop the movement of talkies thing didn't work out too well in the end. In addition, this was the first ceremony that turned the Oscars into a public event, being broadcast via radio, and several careers being made or boosted by Oscar wins. At the end of the night, the second winner for the Academy Award for Outstanding Picture emerged in the Broadway Melody, also called the Broadway Melody of 1929. As you can guess from that second title, it came out in 1929, thereby making 1928 the only year in the history of the Academy Awards that didn't have a Best Picture winner. The Broadway Melody, for those of you who've never heard of it, which is probably almost all of you, is the first ever movie musical. This may sound impressive, and to be fair it kinda is, but after the jazz singer opened the floodgates of talking pictures, there were a lot of firsts that following year. First full-length talkie, first film to shoot dialogue in outdoor scenes, first movie to have both dialogue and a soundtrack. This is the first all-speaking musical. Now, let me start off this review by saying that I have a major bone to pick with this movie, but we'll get to that later. The Broadway Melody centers around the Mahoney sisters, Queenie, played by Anita Page, and Hank, played by Bessie Love. They're a sister act who come to New York City to try to make it on Broadway, and are given an in by Hank's fiancé, Eddie Kearns, played by Charles King. There's two problems with their goal, however. One is that Broadway isn't nearly as welcoming as they would hope. Two is that the vast majority of the men they meet are horn dogs who want to bang Queenie, and one of them happens to be Eddie. Yeah, that plot sounds a little melodramatic, and believe me it is, but again, 1929, movie cliches still weren't a thing just yet. Besides, even if it is cliched, I have to admit that I was surprised by how much I actually found myself getting into this movie. The big reason for that ultimately comes down to the Mahoney sisters, both of whom are very likable. While their characters are a bit stock in the sense that the older sister, Hank, is much more bossy while the younger Queenie is more naive, at the same time they're both given depth, have great chemistry, and most importantly, they seem like real sisters. They fight, they argue, they tease, they can get downright nasty, but you know that they'll do anything for each other. Hell, half the problems that exist in this movie come from both sisters loving each other too much, causing the other to snap back, which is a very good conflict to have. I also like how they didn't go for the cheap and easy way out by making Hank jealous of her younger sister. It's established pretty early on in the film that not only is Queenie hotter than her sister, but she's also much more talented. Throw in the fact that Hank's fiancé is hitting on her behind Hank's back, it would seem like the logical option to make Hank hate her sister, but no, they actually really humanize her. She's concerned for Queenie, she wants her to make it out okay, and you see how badly this tears her apart. At the same time, however, you also understand why Queenie would start to rebel in the first place. She's not doing it in a mean way, she just spent her whole life taking orders that she feels the need to start making her own decisions, even if they're not good ones. The movie lets you know that she's in the wrong, but still allows you to understand where she's coming from. The rest of the cast are good, though nothing special. A lot of the acting is that kind of early sound style where a lot of the actors are still transitioning from silent films, though they're still a little over the top. The only other character really worth talking about is Eddie, but we'll get to him later. I should also talk about the music, since this was the first definitive musical. As I said in my previous video, you could make an argument for The Jazz Singer being the first musical, but this was what more cemented the genre. Now bear in mind that when I say first musical, it's not really a musical in the sense that you might be thinking. Like, it does have singing and dancing, but not in a modern way. Here, let me try to explain. If tomorrow you decided to go see, let's say Cats on Broadway, you would notice that the songs are sung to either advance the story, introduce a character, or tell us the emotions that a character is feeling. This is largely what draws people to musicals in the first place, being able to see a character bear their innermost feelings through the power of song. The Broadway melodies, song, and dance numbers exist because the characters work jobs that require them to sing and dance. They're just fun scenes to add relief from the drama. Not that this is a bad thing, mind you, it's just how the movie is set up. It's actually an interesting watch too, since I don't think movies were capable of soundtracks at the time. Now I know what you're thinking, how the hell is a movie not able to have a soundtrack? Silent movies had music in them all the time. While it is true generic strawman archetype, it's also because silent movies were silent. Talking pictures needed to use that audio space for voices, and usually the music is just in the opening credits. That's why if you ever watch a movie from the dawn of the sound era, you'll notice that they don't have background music while people are talking. Thus, doing a full-on musical pretty much required the sound to have been recorded while they were filming. That's why a lot of musical numbers in this movie take place on a stage with a conveniently nearby orchestra pit, or a character playing a piano, and if they're not doing that, then you can be assured that some crew member off camera is doing that. Or, if that's not happening, then the audio is being recorded elsewhere and you won't be able to hear any sound from the actual scene itself. Hell, if you're paying attention, you can actually see this in action. Look at this opening scene, which takes place inside an instrumental studio where everyone's practicing at once, causing a cacophony of music. In a modern film, each of these instruments would be recorded separately and then mixed together in such a way that you can clearly hear what our character is saying over them. But because this is so primitive, they just put Eddie closer to the microphone and you can actually hear him being drowned out by the noises a little bit. Pretty cool, huh? On the songs themselves, they're pretty standard for the time period. I'll admit that I don't really listen to vaudeville ragtime. In fact, I don't know anyone who listens to vaudeville ragtime. But the songs do their job fine and are fun enough. I especially like the Wedding of the Painted Doll scene. It's a catchy song and has a pretty cool dance number. That's the other thing about a lot of these early sound films and a big reason why they ended up ruining so many careers. If you ever worked with an older film camera, you'll know that these things were powered by motors, and these motors were loud. They were also about 10 times the size of my Panasonic here, so, just use your imagination. As you can guess, having something this loud humming whilst you're trying to record sound is pretty much impossible. So this forced filmmakers to encase the cameras in cabinets so as to muffle the noise. Again, these cabinets would have looked nothing like this, so, imagination. Thus, the cameras became much bulkier, more unwieldy, and harder to move, meaning that they would stay in one place for longer, thereby forcing the more subdued nature of early talking films. As a result, excessive movement was dialed down, action was replaced by suspense, and long takes reigned supreme. You see this trend in the Broadway melody, as the dance numbers are as elaborate as possible to make it as visually interesting as possible without cutting. After all, they can only change camera angles so many times before they start losing time on the shoot itself. It's nice, visually pleasing, and you probably don't even notice. Okay, whoa, I just went off on a huge tangent there. Back to the movie itself. What else do I need to talk about? Well, the story moves along at a nice pace and keeps you interested, so that's pretty cool. And, okay, I'm just putting off the rant here. Let's talk about the problem with the movie. Let me ask you a philosophical question, dear viewer. Can a great movie be ruined by a bad ending? This is a common argument in film criticism that seems to pop up every now and then, and it's interesting to see how divided people can get on it. Some argue that since the ending of a work of art is the last thing that you remember from it and is what the whole story is building to, then a bad ending can altogether ruin the film. Others argue that a film is the sum of its parts, and if a movie has a crap ending, then you can still enjoy the rest of it fine, provided that it's good. Personally, I fall into the latter camp. I think that if a movie is good for 90% of its runtime and drops the ball at the end, that doesn't necessarily take away from all the good times you were having beforehand. I bring this up because The Broadway Melody is actually one of the very few movies that I've seen where the ending totally ruined it for me. Now, I'm going to do my best to avoid spoiling this film just on the off chance that you want to see it, but I am only human and it is possible for you to guess what happens at the end from what I'm talking about here. If you're interested in seeing this movie and you want to watch it, I'm putting a time code in the corner of the screen right now for when you get to a spoiler-free zone. Again, I'm not going to try to spoil it, it just might happen. That having been said, remember Eddie, that cocky sleazebag who's trying to bang his fiance's baby sister? Well, it's not just a passing attraction where he flirts every now and then. No, he's dead fucking serious. Like, as soon as Hank leaves the room, he hits on Queenie like it's the end of the world, in probably the creepiest ways possible. And at first, I thought he was a good character. Not in the sense I support him acting like the East Area rapist, but because I found him to be a good villain. I was looking forward to seeing the Mahonies give him what he deserves at the end of the movie. Here's where the problem pops up, though. When it comes time for the climax, the film sets it up in a way that we're supposed to be rooting for Eddie. Like, not in a way where he learns from his mistakes, his many awful mistakes, but we're supposed to forgive them and root for him and have a big, yeah, you go get him moment. Not only does it not feel earned, but it also betrays the setup the film was giving, and it's making us sympathize with a pretty disgusting character. Now, you could say that maybe that this was just a sign of the times, maybe what's considered sexual harassment today wouldn't have been an issue back in the 20s. You could say that, but you'd be wrong, and I can prove it. One of the major subplots of the film is that a theater executive, played by Kenneth Thompson, is trying to court Queenie, and both Hank and Eddie try to talk her out of it, which is what drives one of the major wedges between the group. Now, for starters, Eddie isn't trying to talk Queenie out of dating him because the guy's an asshole, he's trying to do it so he can have her for himself. But here's the thing, as you can predict, the executive is a creep in his own right, and the film is definitely trying to portray him that way. Like in one scene, you'd see him try to lure Queenie away from a party into a secluded room, even though she doesn't want to go with him. That's all well and good, but now look at this scene where Eddie, our hero, is hitting on her. He pins her against the wall and tries to force her to kiss him. That is so much worse! Okay, worse is probably not the word to use here, since you should never ever do either of these things to someone, but this guy is supposed to be our hero, and he is such a scumbag! It's a shame too, because I was honestly getting into this movie and looking forward to how it was going to resolve itself. I thought it was going to end on a really unique note where it's these two sisters against the world, but they still have each other. I wanted to see Eddie get his just desserts. I wanted to see the theater executive get one up. I wanted to see the Mahonies make amends and accept each other, which, granted, they kind of do, but not like this. This is such an awful way to end a story, and it's one of the few movies that honestly disgusts me. I think the Broadway melody is meant to be seen by the whole family too, which means that young children can watch it and take away lessons from it. That disturbs the hell out of me, because this is not the way you're supposed to act when you like somebody. So, to answer the earlier question of whether an awful ending can ruin an otherwise good movie, I think in this case, the answer is yes. The way that they resolve this story is so gross that I really don't feel comfortable watching it, or for that matter, recommending it. But there's other problems here too. The Broadway melody is very outdated. I know that usually goes without saying when it comes to a lot of old movies, but that's not always true. The Jazz Singer, I thought, aged fine for the most part. Like, it's old, sure, but you can still watch it and enjoy it. Some of the movies I'm going to be talking about in the next video still hold up. This has a lot more isms of the time period. Now, whether they throw you out of the movie or cement your interest by creating a time capsule, I think we can all agree on one thing. They make for some great moments of unintentional comedy. From some really bad punch edits, to more than a few weird lines,
Well, I've got my suspicions about any guy that kisses a girl's hand.
to some very obviously dubbed scenes. I mean, look at this part. Hank's guitar playing is so out of sync with the music that you could put anything over the scene and have it fit. You could put a Monomarth in here and have it fit. And that's really all there is to say about the Broadway melody. It is an interesting watch if you want to see how the musical genre began, but aside from that, I really can't recommend this film. It's not the worst movie I've seen, but it does have one of the worst parts of a movie I've seen. If it ended just a little bit differently, I would probably be praising it. But as is, it's pretty morally skewed. Which really sucks, because I thought it was a solid film up until the last 15 minutes there. Not perfect, but, good. But that having been said, yeah, the ending really does ruin this movie for me. Maybe it might not ruin it for you, but honestly, there's far better films that you could be watching instead. Join me at the next video to hear about some of them.
They flicker there, a million hearts beat quicker there. Those skies are gray on the great white way. That's the Broadway melody. Let's move back to the table, kids. We're to our dance. You all ready, Crab? Come on, now let's go. Here we are. Sweetie, why don't you look at my feet? Look ahead.
Listen, Toots, what's the matter with the left leg?